I've been into a lot of prisons in my career. It's only recently I've started to feel quite concerned about my own personal security when I've been into prisons.
Yeah, and if you bring it down a little bit more than that, you can start to be more proactive and perhaps create more therapeutic wings, psychologically informed environments.
Now, this was on the 9th of January 2024 in the Justice Committee, and the subject was about the future prison population and estate capacity. And if you want to know who the witnesses are for time, their names and their positions are in the description box below for you. Well, Labour MP Rachel Hopkins asked this question, and what these experts had to say was very interesting.
Thank you. You talked about the increase in assaults. I was like your take on the effect overcrowding is having on the levels of self-harm and mental health.
Yeah, good question, isn't it? Because let's be honest, how many times have you heard these absolute nut jobs saying that, these prisons are like a holiday camp now? Yeah, exactly. I'm sure it could be different now, but I'm sure I heard there were a quote that there's about 11 people who try to commit suicide a week or something. So I would say, you name me a holiday camp that has at least 11 people a week trying to commit suicide or do commit suicide. So it's a good question. But yeah, I have to say, Sir Larry, yes. We totally agree about our Mr. Daly, yes. No, he didn't visit that prison. He was at Angela Rayner's council house and he visited and a restraining order was issued. I totally agree, without a doubt. That's where he'll have really been, won't it?
It's very obvious. If you go into prison, you can see it. And I think, because one of the things, I mean, if you crowd people together in unsanitary conditions, that inevitably raises the level of stress, and that inevitably increases levels of self-harm and levels of and affects people's mental health. I mean, I think you certainly in prisons, overcrowded prisons, I've been into recently. I mean, I've been into a lot of prisons in my career. It's only recently I've started to feel quite concerned about my own personal security when I've been into prisons. And that's not a surprise. You've got guys who are kind of banged up for 23 hours a day. They're just, they can get whatever substances they want, and they haven't got the staff to manage them. They're all out on the wing on association. And you think, maybe I'm just going to scuttle along the corridor and get out of here because it doesn't feel safe. And I pity the staff who work there and the impact this has on some of their mental health and well-being. So I think prisons, I mean, I'm not going around prisons to the extent I used to, but the ones I have been to, I would say, certainly in the autumn, were in a very, very volatile state. And I think that would affect prisoners themselves in terms of their mental health and self-harm. It certainly affected staff and was obvious to see.
And of course, the overcrowding means that there are fewer staff available to respond to those problems that prisoners have. So we have a scheme in the prison system, the so-called ACT scheme, which is a sort of suicide and self-harm prevention scheme. On paper, it's a very good kind of world-leading scheme, but it is quite staff-intensive. And for the people who are presenting most risk, it involves having very frequent meetings, exchanging information, checking on people and all of that. That is so much more difficult if you've got too many prisoners and too few staff. And there are countless examples of that.
And often, and quite a lot, certainly some in the city prisons, the staff that are there are very inexperienced and new, quite young. And so developing those kinds of, that dynamic security where you've got a relationship with the prisoners, it's in both your interest to keep the place calm and working well. You haven't got people with the experience necessarily to do that. It's an alarming situation, I think.
And building on that, with the likely increase in prison population, then will there be then the commensurate increase in poor mental health?
Yes. I'm sure you will inevitably see that, I think. And you can see it, I think. And if you talk to, experienced prison officers, ones that are left, that's what they would say. They would say that the people they are dealing with are now different from the people they were dealing with before, and to some extent even very experienced people will tell you they're beyond their skills to deal with. They aren't, they're not mental health nurses.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, final point on that, you know, any suggestions around how government could better manage prisoners with poor mental health in these more overcrowded establishments?
And I think your question presumes the answer, and one answer is, well, you don't have overcrowded establishments. You know, I think we've, if you know prisons, you have the kind of the so-called certified normal accommodation. That's what this prison should have, and then you have the operational capacity. And far too many prisons are operating at operational capacity levels rather than certified normal accommodation. And so, if we can get back to a point where actually prisons are more as a matter of standard operating at certified normal accommodation rather than operational capacity, it becomes possible to do other things. Prisoners don't kind of feel as crammed into cells. Prisons aren't themselves making judgments about cell sharing, which maybe is not appropriate because actually these prisoners shouldn't be put in the same cell together. And it's going to be easier to actually get the services to prisoners they need. But for as long as we're in this situation of just ongoing overcrowding, which we then accept as just the norm, rather than what should be is the exception, then, it's not going to get better.
I think what I would say that's perhaps slightly more kind of optimistic is I don't think you need to do much in terms of population to make the situation quite a lot more manageable. When there was not the same degree of overcrowding, what prison managers were able to do was manage where their population was in their prison. So you could have a wing that was a bit quieter, where the people are finding it a bit more difficult to cope. You could put them. You could make sure you'd have a bit of space on your first night wing for longer term prisoners who had simply not adapted to life on the wings. You could start to do all those things, or you could put a prisoner who was struggling a bit with someone you felt might keep an eye on them, look after. You could start to do those sorts of things. You knew your prisoners, you could work with the prisoners to make it work. But but if actually what you're doing is you're operating at kind of 99% capacity, which they are now, you simply have to put people where there's a space. Bring it down just a little bit and you start to get that flexibility back where you can make it work better. So there's a danger if almost that we sort of go along with the argument that nothing can be done. I think you can do things, and actually some relatively small reductions in the population, which I guess actually I'd be interested to see the next set of safety figures after there has been a bit of a reduction in the population. I think that will give them a bit more scope, the better governors, to be a bit more creative about how they're managing their population.
Yeah, and if you bring it down a little bit more than that, you can start to be more proactive and perhaps create more therapeutic wings, psychologically informed environments were created, sort of special units, but they're characterised by relatively smaller numbers of prisoners and relatively larger numbers of prison staff and healthcare staff. And of course, those are luxuries in the current kind of population climate that can't be done. So I think, I agree. I think we could look to a brighter future, but it does depend on getting these numbers under control.
Can you imagine the right wingers here and all that stuff about making it a bit more therapeutic and all wonderful? They would have an absolute cow. They'll be demanding that they keep being given bread and water and 50 lashings for looking at somebody strange or whatever. You know what they're like. But yeah, very interesting that though.
Very interesting. Now, you may have noticed this is a bit of a live stream, and if you want to watch the live stream, here it is, somewhere around here. And if you don't want to watch my ugly mush that's on the screen, not a problem. The link will be in the description box below for you. But what do you guys think? Are these people right in what they're saying? Let me know what you guys think down below, and I shall just bid you farewell and take care, my friends.